Right now, picture this. You are standing in a frozen, wind-blasted wasteland. It is 30,000 years before right now. There is no Netflix, no smartphone in your pocket, no alarm clock, no mortgage, and absolutely no Sunday night existential dread about your inbox. You have only one overarching absolute priority, and it is beating like a drum in your chest. Do not starve and do not freeze. The air is so cold it feels like swallowing crushed glass. Your breath turns to frost on your eyelashes. You and a dozen of your family members are huddled on a ridge, gripping weapons made of wood and stone. And there, down in the valley, is the reason you are out here in the freezing wind. A woolly mammoth. Look at it. Really look at it in your mind. This is not a cow. This is a living, breathing mountain of muscle, fat, and bone. It stands up to 11 feet tall at the shoulder. It weighs roughly 6 to 8 tons. Its tusks, curving out like massive scimitars, are longer than you are tall. This is a creature that could flip a modern SUV with a casual toss of its head. And you, a fragile furless ape weighing maybe 140 pounds, are about to try and kill it with a stick. And here is the strange part, the question that almost nobody actually stops to ask. How on earth did we actually do this? Not as in, oh, we threw some rocks and it fell over. We are not talking about the cartoon version of cavemen where a bunch of guys in leopard skins chase a lumbering, stupid beast into a conveniently placed ditch. We are talking about the reality of flesh and blood. How does a creature as small, slow, and fragile as a human being take down the armored tank of the Pleistocene epoch? What if the stories we tell ourselves about our clever, easy victories over nature are entirely wrong? What if hunting the mammoth was not a grand, heroic, sporting event, but a desperate, terrifying gamble where the odds were completely stacked against us? We build museums and put their skeletons on display. We marvel at the spearheads behind glass, but we completely erase the sheer, unfiltered terror of what those spearheads were actually used for. And this is the rabbit hole we are going down today. Buckle up, because the logistics of Ice Age survival are about to get weird, bloody, and surprisingly emotional. Let us start at the very beginning. What are we actually looking at when we look at a mammoth? Let us start with the most obvious thing, the target itself. When we think of mammoths, we tend to think of them as big, hairy cows wandering aimlessly across the snow, just waiting to become prehistoric hamburgers. But they were not cows, they were elephants. And that changes everything. Modern biologists and neuroscientists have spent decades studying elephants, and the honest answer is, they are terrifyingly smart. Back in the 1970s, the psychologist Gordon Gallup came up with the mirror test, a way to check if an animal can recognize its own reflection. Very few animals pass it. Chimpanzees do, dolphins do, and elephants do. They look in the mirror, they know it is them, and they use it to inspect marks on their own bodies. They have a massive encephalization quotient, which is a fancy way of saying their brains are huge relative to their bodies. And those brains are packed with a highly complex neocortex. They are self-aware. They have phenomenal memories. They live in deeply complex matriarchal societies. They communicate over miles using low-frequency rumbles that travel through the ground. And when an elephant dies, its family mourns. They will return to the bones of their dead years later, picking them up, passing them around, standing in complete silence. They grieve. Now take all of that intelligence, all of that memory, all of that fierce familial loyalty, and wrap it in the ultimate biological armor. The woolly mammoth had a coat of guard hairs that could be 3 feet long. Underneath that was a dense undercoat of fine wool. Underneath that was skin up to 2 inches thick, and underneath the skin was a layer of solid fat up to 4 inches thick. You are looking at a creature wearing the equivalent of a Kevlar vest, wrapped in a down comforter, wrapped in a concrete wall. And you are about to say, well, humans are smart. We probably just dug a massive pit trap, covered it with some branches, and lured the beast into it. Sounds familiar, right? We have all seen that exact drawing in a middle school history textbook. Okay, that is settled. Now forget everything I just said about pit traps. It is complete nonsense. This is where the story takes a sharp turn into reality. Think about what a pit trap actually requires. You need a hole big enough to swallow an animal the size of a garbage truck. Let us say 15 feet deep and 20 feet wide. Now remember where you are. You are in the Ice Age tundra. The ground is permafrost. It is literally frozen solid, harder than concrete. And you do not have a steel shovel. You do not have an excavator. You have the shoulder blade of an elk, a stick, and maybe a sharp rock. Try to go into your backyard right now in the dead of winter and dig a hole the size of a swimming pool using a soup spoon. You would die of exhaustion or freeze to death long before you made a dent. By some estimates, trying to dig a mammoth-sized pit in permafrost with Stone Age tools would take a group of humans weeks, if not months, burning thousands of calories they absolutely could not afford to lose. And then what? You just stand around hoping the highly intelligent, hyper-observant elephant happens to walk over your specific patch of branches in an endless, boundless step? No. Our ancestors were not digging pits. They were using the ultimate cheat code. They were using the planet itself. If you cannot build a trap, you find one. Archaeologists have found sites that rewrite everything we know about hunting tactics. Take the site known as La Côte de Saint-Blelade on the island of Jersey, dating back over 100,000 years. Here, Neanderthals did not dig pits, they used gravity. They found a landscape with a steep, rocky ravine. Then, they waited for a herd of mammoths or woolly rhinos to graze near the edge. Picture the coordination this required. No radios, no earpieces, no second chances. Just a group of hunters armed with burning torches, suddenly leaping from the brush, screaming, waving fire, creating an absolute wall of terror. The goal was not to fight the mammoth. The goal was to panic it, to trigger that deep, primal flight response. The massive animals turn and run from the fire, but they are heavy. They are panicking. The ground is uneven, and the cliff is right there. The momentum of the herd pushes the leaders over the edge. It is brutal. It is astonishingly violent. But it is efficient. If you did not have a cliff, you used water. A mammoth is incredibly strong, but its weight is its worst enemy. A 10-ton animal concentrates all that mass into 4 relatively small feet. If you can drive a mammoth into a peat bog, a frozen lake with thin ice, or deep, thick river mud, the battle is half won. The animal sinks. The more it panics, the deeper it goes. It becomes trapped by its own spectacular biology. But here is the problem nobody could solve with just a swamp. Getting the mammoth stuck does not kill it. It just makes it an incredibly angry, thrashing, terrified mountain of muscle that is now violently throwing its trunk and tusks in every direction. And this is where we have to talk about the weapons. Let me throw you something even wilder than the cliff drive. You are now standing on the edge of a bog. The mammoth is stuck in the mud, trumpeting in rage, the sound vibrating in your teeth. You have to kill it. You cannot just throw a sharp rock at it. Remember the 2 inches of skin and 4 inches of fat. A regular spear thrown by a human arm is just going to bounce off or stick harmlessly in the fat layer, which will probably just annoy the mammoth into flattening you. So, humanity engineered a solution, and it is a masterpiece of prehistoric physics. First, the tip. We are talking about the Clovis point, or the Gravettian point in Europe. These were not just rocks tied to sticks. Flint knapping, the art of striking stones to create blades, is an incredibly complex geometric puzzle. You strike a piece of flint or obsidian with a piece of antler at the exact perfect angle, peeling off flakes to create an edge. A well-crafted obsidian blade is literally sharper than a modern surgical scalpel. I am not making this up. The edge of a flaked obsidian point can come down to a single molecule in thickness. But a sharp tip is not enough. You need kinetic energy. You need speed. The human arm can only throw a spear about 40 to 50 miles per hour. That is not enough to punch through a mammoth's armor to reach the vital organs. So, our ancestors invented the atlatl, the spear thrower. It is deceptively simple. A piece of wood with a hook at the end. You rest the blunt end of your spear in the hook, hold the other end of the atlatl, and throw. What you have just done is artificially lengthen your arm. You have added a second elbow and an extra forearm to your skeletal structure. When you whip that atlatl forward, the physics are staggering. The spear flexes, storing potential energy like a spring, and then snaps off the hook. A dart thrown from an atlatl can reach speeds of over 100 miles per hour. It flies with the terrifying force of a modern compound bow. It is flying fast enough and is heavy enough, and its tip is sharp enough that it can slice through the thick hair, punch through the dense leather skin, part the fat layer, and slide between the giant ribs of the mammoth, piercing a lung or an artery. Yes, exactly that. Our ancestors were applying advanced physics and aerodynamics in the freezing mud 30,000 years ago. And you might think, okay, the spear goes in, the animal dies, we eat. But the timeline of death for an animal this size is agonizing. It does not drop like in a video game. It bleeds, it fights, it thrashes. The hunters would have to throw dozens of spears, darting in and out of the mammoth's reach. A dance of millimeters, waiting for blood loss and exhaustion to finally drag the giant down. And once it falls, a completely different nightmare begins. Okay, let us pause and take a breath. The mammoth is dead. The silence returns to the tundra. You did it. Now what? You have a multi-ton carcass. You cannot put it in a truck. You cannot drag it to a refrigerator. You have to butcher it right there. And the clock is ticking. Within hours, the carcass will freeze solid, becoming impossible to cut. Worse, the smell of blood in the Ice Age tundra is an absolute dinner bell. You know what else lived back then? Cave lions. Massive, terrifying predators 20% larger than modern African lions. Dire wolves. Short-faced bears that stood 12 feet tall on their hind legs and could run as fast as a horse. You are suddenly sitting on the biggest buffet in 100 miles and the apex predators are coming. The butchering process was an absolute frenzy of bloody, desperate labor. They stripped the meat, cutting it into thin strips to dry or smoke. They took the fat. Fat was the most precious calorie source in the freezing world. They took the fur for clothing. They took the sinews for bowstrings and thread. But they did not just eat the mammoth, they lived inside it. In 1965, a farmer in Ukraine was digging a cellar and hit something hard. Archaeologists were called in, and what they found at the Mazirek site is one of the most astonishing things in human history. They found houses, entire complexes, and they were built completely from the ground up out of mammoth bones. Sit with that for a second. There were no trees on the deep tundra, no wood to build shelters, so they used the skeleton of the beast. They used the massive lower jaws to form the base, interlocking them in a circle. They used the long leg bones as support pillars. They arched the enormous curved tusks over the top to create the dome of the roof, and then draped the whole thing in mammoth hides. One single dwelling could contain the bones of up to 95 different mammoths. The mammoth was not just a meal, it was the hardware store, it was the tailor, it was the architect, it was the fuel for their fires. Yes, they burned mammoth bone, because bone marrow is rich in fat and burns hot and slow when there is no wood. The mammoth was their entire universe. And if you think that sounds majestic and harmonious, wait. Because here is where the story stops being an awe-inspiring tale of human ingenuity and becomes something much heavier. But here is the part we do not like to talk about. The part that never makes it into the heroic museum dioramas. We look at the Clovis points, we look at the bone houses, we admire the courage, but we rarely count the cost. Hunting a mammoth was not a sport. It was born of absolute, shivering desperation. And now I have to tell you the other side of this. Science can tell us how they threw the spears, but the bones of our ancestors tell us what happened when they missed, or when the mammoth turned faster than they expected, or when a hunter slipped on a patch of bloody ice. In the 1990s, a paleoanthropologist named Eric Trinkhaus conducted a massive study on the fossilized remains of Neanderthals and early humans. He was looking at their bone fractures. He wanted to know how they got hurt, and what he found was completely baffling at first. The pattern of injuries, the shattered ribs, the broken femurs, the fractured skulls, the compressed spines, did not look like the injuries of hunter-gatherers chasing deer. Trinkhaus compared these ancient fractures to the medical records of modern professions, and he found a perfect match. The injury patterns of Ice Age humans exactly matched the injury patterns of professional rodeo riders. Let that land. The people whose job today is to strap themselves to the back of a 2-ton angry bull and hold on for dear life, that is the exact level of bodily destruction our ancestors were taking on a regular basis. When you get close enough to a mammoth to thrust a spear, you are entering the kill zone. An elephant's trunk has over 40,000 individual muscles. It can pick up a peanut, and it can casually snap the spine of a leopard. A mammoth in a state of absolute panic, fighting for its life, bleeding, terrified, trumpeting into the freezing air, is a localized natural disaster. One swing of that trunk to a hunter's chest, and the ribs cave in, piercing the lungs. One step of a foot the size of a tree stump, and a femur is pulverized into powder. One hook of a tusk, and a human body is thrown 30 feet through the air like a rag doll. There were no hospitals. There were no antibiotics. There were no medevac helicopters. If your leg was shattered on the tundra, your friends had to drag you back to the camp. Every step was agony. You would likely die of infection or shock or gangrene, and the tribe would have to leave you or watch you die in the dark. Think about the sheer, unadulterated terror of standing in the snow knowing this. Watching your brother or your son get crushed into the permafrost in a mist of red snow. Hearing the agonizing, almost human-like screams of the mammoth, because if you have ever heard an elephant in distress, it is a sound that haunts you forever. We glorify the hunt, but the truth is, it was a bloodbath. It was an interspecies war where both sides suffered terribly. The mammoth did not want to die. It fought with a fierce, intelligent desperation to protect its herd, its calves, its life. And the human did not want to die either. But the human had starving children waiting by a dying fire. It was a zero-sum game of survival in the harshest environment on the planet. And for every carcass that fed a tribe for a month, there were hunters who never came home, whose bones were scattered by cave lions, swallowed by the infinite white of the steppe. And right about now, you are probably feeling a strange mixture of awe and unease. The heroic painting of the caveman with the spear suddenly looks like a suicide mission. So why do it? If the cost was so incredibly high, if the danger was so absolute, why did we keep walking out into the freezing wind, clutching our pieces of sharpened stone? We do not know what they thought in their quiet moments. We cannot interview a hunter who lived 30,000 years ago. The honest answer is, science can describe the mechanics of the hunt, but it cannot crawl inside the experience itself. But we can look at what they left behind. Deep inside the caves of Chauvet and Lascaux in France, and Rouffignac, lit only by the flickering glow of animal fat lamps, our ancestors painted. They did not paint trees, they did not paint landscapes, and very rarely did they paint themselves. They painted the animals, they painted the mammoths. And if you look at those paintings, you do not see the crude scribbles of a butcher looking at a piece of meat. You see reverence. The lines are graceful, deeply observant, and beautiful. They captured the curve of the tusks, the heavy slope of the back, the knowing look in the eye. They knew these animals intimately. They watched them. They understood their power. Maybe they felt a deep, tragic gratitude. They knew that their lives were entirely dependent on the death of this magnificent giant. The mammoth was the giver of life. Its flesh kept their hearts beating. Its fur kept their children from freezing in the dark. Its bones literally held the roofs over their heads. There is something profoundly sad and profoundly beautiful about this. It is the heavy, undeniable truth of what it means to be alive. Every breath we take is bought by the energy of the world around us. Our ancestors were not detached from this reality. They were submerged in it, up to their elbows in it. They faced the terror of the world head-on because they had no other choice. And because they did, because they took those impossible risks, because they dragged their broken bodies back to the fire and taught the next generation how to nap the flint and throw the atlatl, we are here. The very fact that you and I can sit here today, in our heated rooms, looking at screens, asking questions about the past, is a luxury paid for by the terrifying courage of a starving ape standing in the snow. We survived the cold. We survived the dark. We survived the giants. Let us go back to that frozen ridge. It is the same Ice Age tundra. The wind is still howling, cutting through your fur garments. The air is still like shattered glass in your lungs. And there is the mammoth, massive, ancient, standing in the valley below. But now you know what is actually about to happen. You know that it is not a dumb beast, but a highly intelligent, grieving, feeling mind inside an impenetrable fortress of flesh. You know that you are not going to dig a cartoon pit. You are going to have to look it in the eye. You are going to have to use the physics of the atlatl, the sharpness of the glass-like stone, and the terrifying chaos of the cliff. You know that by the end of the day, there will be blood on the snow, and you know that you might not survive it. But you look back at the faint smoke rising from your camp, where your family is shivering, and you grip your spear. It is a terrible, beautiful world, and you have to live in it. If this made you feel the sheer weight of what our ancestors endured, if you suddenly feel a little warmer in your room right now, hit subscribe. Join the people who love taking the ordinary stories we thought we knew and cracking them wide open. And tell me down in the comments, if you were transported back to that freezing ridge, knowing exactly what it takes, do you think you could throw the spear? Or would you run? I read every single one. Stay curious, stay warm, and I will see you in the next one.